1 second. Okay. Did you get a notification? Is that come up? Yep. Cool. Okay. Awesome. Okay. Okay. Welcome everyone. Very warm welcome to webinar 1 of the NORF Open Access Repository Project. If you have your mic unmuted, I just ask you to mute it now, please. That'd be really helpful since we're recording. Thanks so much. I'm Dr. Chris Loughnane. I'm project manager for the project, and I'm joined today with the co-host, Dr. Cillian Joy, who is the project PI. So a very warm welcome to you. The schedule for this morning. After my brief introduction, I'm going to hand over to Cillian, who's going to talk about the project scope. Then I'll talk about project findings and the engagement plan. I'll hand back to Cillian to talk about the pilot metadata alignment we have going on right now. And then we're going to invite some of our project board members to a roundtable discussion. And following that, we'll have some questions and answers from the audience. Any questions you have, please pop into the chat. That would be great. Just to give a brief introduction to our distinguished panel this morning. So we have Seán Harnett, who is Institutional Repository Administrator at Atlantic Technological University, Galway-Mayo, Andrew Simpson, Associate Librarian, Royal College of Surgeons in Ireland, and Caleb Derven, Head of Digital Scholarship and Systems, University of Limerick. And just before we get going, and for those who don't know the project that well or haven't attended one of our talks about the project, I just wanted to talk briefly about how it's governed and how it's composed. So it's a NORF-funded project, one of 6 initial pilot projects from the NORF 2022 funding. There's a project board made of 12 institutional representatives from research-performing organizations, but the project's based at the University of Galway, University of Galway Library. The board reports to NORF, and I report to the board, excuse me. And then I also manage a working group made up of representatives from each of those institutions too. The project is a 2-year initiative supported by the NORF 2022 Open Research Fund. The project's primary goal is to strengthen Ireland's open repository network by addressing repository metadata fragmentation and other challenges which impede progress towards 100% open research goals for Ireland. This falls under Theme 2, Achieving 100% Open Access to Research Publications of the National Action Plan for Open Research 2022 to 2030. And the objective is to transition to a unified national repository system in whatever form that may take, and to align all our repositories together using a community-centric approach. So that's my intro done. I'm going to hand over to Cillian now, who's going to talk about the project scope in more depth. Thank you. Cillian, when you're ready.
Thanks, Chris. Yeah, welcome everyone. So I'm just going to get my share going. Second now. Perfect. So you should be able to see my screen. So it says there that I'm going to talk about an overview and the pilot. So as Chris said, like Chris kind of framed it as scope, and it's kind of scope, but I just called it overview or background or something like that. And I think what we're trying to aim today to do is give some detail of what we're doing. Definitely. We've had some events where we've been communicating what we've been doing. We've had reports from the survey and from all of the kind of data collection and the report as well. And we're kind of in the stage now of piloting or the approach. So well, I've broken into 2 sections. I'll be first talking about a bit of background, I think, and maybe a bit of vision about where we might be going. And then get kind of a bit narrow then and talk about the pilot and say, what are we actually doing to achieve. And then the last piece, which Chris said, is of course the feedback. So I framed this as kind of background and overview, and now some people may know this, but I think it is useful reminder as well. And just to say, I think collectively, we've been on this journey in terms of strengthening the open access repositories for some time, collectively, nationally. From early days, there's been various kind of twists and turns. I think a key date really was the formation of, well, there was lots of key dates, but let's just pull out one and let's call it NORF, really, because that really was the kind of the instigator for more recent collective action. It says made the key date here for NORF was 2016, and that is true. But there was also like a refresh of NORF in more recent years, and I think that really kind of broadened the involvement of stakeholders across Ireland, and really got everyone involved, from research forming organizations, state agencies, policymakers, funders, everybody together, and that really, I think, accelerated and drove the changes, and which of course then led to the National Action Plan for Open Research. Now, there's a lot behind this, and I'm just showing this. You know, people know this already, but the three themes of culture, open access, and data, and the project that we are talking about today is in the open access theme. And it's not on its own. You know, there are lots of other projects going on, and they're all working collectively towards kind of the same goal. We're all driving in the same direction. I think that's a nice kind of cushion, I suppose, to have in a way, or some sort of, you know, that you're not on your own. We're all driving towards the same place. And I think there's a genuine feeling of, you know, we are actually making progress collectively. The key projects, I think, that relate to this project clearly are in the theme 2, which is achieving the open access. And these are the repository one, which we're going to talk about today, the monitor, the Diamond project, which is Publish OA, the PID work that's going on, and then, of course, the policy, rights retention, secondary rights, and things like that, all kind of key pieces. I want to spend a few minutes talking about where potentially we're going here and what we've kind of learned throughout the project, and what the kind of aims of the project are and how it might differ from what went on before. The idea is to have a network of repositories nationally that are decentralized, yet connected, right? So what I mean by that is, you know, we're using the same terminology, metadata standards. We're aligning at the repository level, yet we're decentralized because we allow for each repository to operate independently, to have customizations, yes, to be flexible to local needs, but yet connected via a guidelines, standards, community, and things like that. I think this is a really important point, because, you know, when we're connecting each repository locally, we're doing it to best practice standards internationally. So by taking this approach of connection, we're also connected globally as well. So there's no like gateway to go through, or there's no aggregation is the wrong word. There's no kind of central extra middleware or infrastructure to make us be connected globally. We are being connected globally by what we're doing. And if I was to do a rough bad diagram of that, it just means something like this. You know, we can connect directly as repositories into the global repository network. And why that's important is because there's a big acceleration in this area, and open repositories globally means slightly different than maybe the start of what an institutional repository might have meant back in the day. Now, repositories include services like, or can connect to services like open peer review. And that's why I'm saying the next, sorry, I have to go back here. The next one here is integrate the Diamond into green. So what I mean by that is that, again, this is vision, but, you know, there's a strong green infrastructure in place already, globally and nationally. Diamond it's a hot topic. You know, that's obviously doing the publishing, the peer review, and all the infrastructure together. But I really do think personally, anyway, that there's an opportunity to combine the best of Diamond and the best of green to create what we're actually looking for. Again, if we go to very simple diagrams, this, I think, is what it means. You know, that everything can connect to each other because everyone's using standards, and the Diamond really brings in the peer review piece, and I suppose the journal piece as well, and building kind of reputation. People are in slightly different places, I think, on this, but you know, people have different visions, I think, of how this will work. But I want to focus on one active piece of the open repository community, which is Notify from CORE, the Confederation of Open Access Repositories internationally. So there is a protocol that exists that allows repositories to, let's say, accept a peer review, a preprint, and then send that preprint for peer review using this protocol called Notify. So the idea then is that gets peer reviewed, and then it gets, I suppose, once it's gone through that process, then it can be published. And there's terms like overlay journal that sit on top of repositories. Some people call it diamond and things like that. So it's an interesting area. You know, it's been around definitely for a couple of years. It's definitely gained momentum more recently, and I think this sort of a thinking, I think, kind of makes sense. But on top of this, I think it's more than actual thinking. This is working. This is real now. So I'll just give you one example of submitting a preprint to a journal. Is just what I talked about. But this is working in practice in HAL at the moment. So let's say the National Repository in France. So you can at the moment submit to a specific preprint to a journal. It goes for open peer review. And then it goes back and it is actually published. The link is there if you want to see more information. So, you know, it's not just an idea or kind of it still is vision, because obviously it needs to be implemented, but, you know, this is working in practice as well. Now, just to finish, I said I would talk about scope, and I think I have to talk about scope really. And this is just broad brush stuff in terms of the project, you know, what we're talking about. Chris already talked about a unified network, and we kind of talked about that kind of nationally as well. And we're doing that based on standardization and metadata alignment, community and community guidelines. They're the key things. So, and just to be clear, like we're not, as part of the pilot, we are looking kind of in depth at metadata. But like, I suppose working on content or creating kind of extra data is definitely out of scope for the project, or any local kind of customizations that are required, I think, are kind of out of scope as well. And then clearly any IT and hardware and things like that. So I'm going to stop there, because the next area I'm going to go on to talk about is the pilot, which is getting into a bit more detail. But at this point, I'll just hand back over to Chris.
Thanks, Cillian. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, thanks. Yeah, that was really interesting. So we kind of got into the future a little bit there, and the going into the aims and scope, but I want to bring it back to the present to just talk about and the past too, what we've done over the past year. So the approach of the project has always been, it's obviously been about technology because that's inescapable, but it's about community too. So we're focused on building or aligning Ireland's open repositories with international best practices. And to do so, we're adopting a sustainable, consensus-led and community-centric approach. And you can see that in the makeup of the project board. You know, different kinds of research performing organizations across Ireland, governmental institutions, educational institutions, and, you know, lots of variation in those. And that demonstrates the variety of different kinds of repositories too, because every institution has a different type, not a different type of repository, but a different history of its repository. So the main aim of the project is to provide a technical and community solution for research output that is more research-centric, that's community-governed and responsive to diverse needs nationally and across the globe. And as Cillian said, you know, we have to connect the local to the national, to the global. We have to think about repository networks in an open access as a global network. So we recognize the diversity of the repository community through its different stakeholders. You know, it's obviously repository managers, but it's researchers, it's funding bodies, policymakers, and institutional leaders too. And by training and aligning the repository community, we can inform strategic decision-making. We can inform policy development and resource allocation to support advancing 100% open access in Ireland. So in order to aid or advance the community, we needed to understand what community of repositories already exists in Ireland. So we conducted lots of different data collection last year, including desk research, engaging with other peer projects, including the Open Access Monitor project, which was really useful. We conducted a survey of open repositories in Ireland and compiled a national inventory of existing repositories. We interviewed repository managers and strategists to gain more detailed and qualitative data. We conducted stakeholder dialogue, so talking with different people like Core, like IRL, Open Door, and on the metadata side with OpenAir and Reox. And then asking repositories to perform some self-assessment too with some of the tools that are available. So Plan S self-assessment tool and the OpenAir validator tool. And I just want to point you to the project website, which you may not be aware of. It's universityofgalway.ie/open repositories. So there you have a link to register your repository. There's the inventory there, survey information, and also the project plan and the project team, further information on that. And what we've been doing in terms of outreach and engagement is also on there. So as Cillian mentioned, we've released a couple of reports. The first one was in December 23, Advancing Open Repositories in Ireland, a survey and strategic recommendations for national progress. And most of that is focused on the survey data we collected. So in that survey, we gathered insights into the characteristics of the different repositories, their technical infrastructure, staffing, metadata practices, content types, sustainability, and concerns. So we had about 40 questions on all of these different aspects, and then some additional questions on things like Plan S compliance. So the survey gathered data regarding the technical aspect of repository management, including software platforms used, whether they were hosted locally or externally, the frequency of updates, harvesting practices, metadata compliance, all those type of technical aspects. But we also talked about things like, we also asked questions about, staffing levels and funding. So how many full-time equivalent staff for each particular task and function in the repository, things like management, technical support, and metadata and content curation. So loads of data in there, and the accompanying data set is with that on Zenodo as well. So I would definitely point you towards that if you're interested in finding out more. The second report we released was March 2024, Advancing Ireland's Open Repository Landscape and Strategic Roadmap. And that was much broader. That was talking about all the different data we collected and starting to lay down a vision for where repositories are going in Ireland and how the project sees itself as enabling the progress. So this was an analysis of the current state, the challenges, and the potential of open repositories in Ireland. All the different data we collected through interviews, surveys, those kind of things, and then looking toward the future. So lots and lots of information in there. I point you towards that too, but I'll just bring out some of the highlights now. So the survey indicated a standardized approach to address metadata and support challenges at the repository level. This is without requiring extensive new technical infrastructure, as Cillian mentioned. 48% of repositories indicated they were compliant with OpenAir, with 38% planning immediate updates, which sounds good, but when you start to dig in a little further and start to talk to repository managers and things like that, there's a level of compliance there, but we need to get the level of compliance up. And that's what Cillian will be talking about with the pilot. Some of the primary metadata deficiencies identified were things like access rights, project or funder information, publication type, and licensing conditions. And I just want to focus for a second on licensing conditions because, this is something that the Open Access Monitor talked about and alerted us to as well, because if you have open access materials in your repository, for example, and they're not being harvested, if they're not indicated that they're open access through the license, then they won't be counted towards that 100% open access that we're aiming for. So very important. In terms of the interviews, talking with the repository managers, like we said, a huge diversity in approaches to repository management, which reflects the diversity of repositories, and we want to be very respectful towards that diversity. We're not taking a kind of top-down, heavy-handed approach. It's grassroots, it's from the bottom up, and it's community-led. So that's why it's important to hear all the different voices of the different repository managers and the different repository staff. In terms of the repository strategists, so these are people who have strategic responsibility in their institutions for the repositories. There was a widespread recognition of the pivotal role of repositories in preserving diverse scholarly outputs and also offering a trusted and viable alternative to commercial publishing routes. So bibliodiversity was a very important theme in all the different interviews, offering that alternative to commercial publishing. Common priorities that emerged include the metadata challenges, the need for advocacy for Green OA and a support for Green OA, and a desire for community networks. So some key challenges that we identified. Metadata quality and compliance. I won't talk about this too much because Cillian will be talking about it in the pilot, but the need for metadata standards which affect interoperability and compliance with international guidelines are very important. Staffing shortages and limited resources. These have a huge effect on the effectiveness of repositories and how they can be managed, including their sustainability. Visibility issues and limited user engagement. This is a big issue for all repositories, I think. Making sure that researchers, even with the mandate from their funders to deposit or make their research outputs open access, don't necessarily put their outputs into the institutional repository that's available for them. So how do we manage that? And cultural, strategic, and inadequate national collaboration. So just making sure that we're aligned with national priorities and also aligned on the international level. Oops, I've got heavy fingers. Sorry. Okay, recommendations. So let me just get back. All right, this is a key one, I think. Developing a sustainable funding model is essential for ensuring long-term viability and sustainability of all Irish repositories. It highlights the critical need for reliable financial support for staffing, maintenance, and upgrades. We need to think about funding on the national level to make sure that all repositories are at the same standard and they're sustainable, that they can do the things that we need them to do. Standardizing metadata quality is crucial. So we're doing that through aligning with OpenAIRE version 4. This ensures compliance with open research mandates. Fostering national collaboration to ensure shared resources and best practices, however that might turn out. We also want to establish a community of practice among repository managers. This was a need that was voiced very strongly by people working in repositories to support them and to support repository growth. And just finally, to clearly define the purpose of open repositories, why they're important, what we're doing, and how we can work together to achieve shared objectives for open research. So, it's a community-focused project, and we're looking at community solutions. We're looking at strengthening infrastructure, obviously looking at metadata quality, but continuing to promote open mandates. As Cillian said, emerging technologies, how can we use those to connect diverse repositories without necessarily a top-down technocratic approach? Building repository capacity and training for repository managers and other repository staff. And just, collaborative partnerships, doing this together, seeing how we can do it. So just very quickly before I hand back to Cillian, I'm not sure what the time is. I can't see my time on here. One of the things we're doing is meeting regularly as a working group. We have members from all the different repositories, and they've been helping me to formulate things like the engagement plan. So creating events like this, working on different aspects of engaging the repository community across Ireland, and then also the pilot stuff that Cillian's going to talk about. And one of the things we've talked about is a membership organization. Now, this is still in the very early days of planning, but I just wanted to preview it very briefly. We're talking about a possible membership organization called Open Repositories Ireland. This would be a membership organization for institutions and individuals working in the open repository space. We want to bring the repository community together through training, through events, through self-advocacy. We want to deliver that community practice for repository managers because it's super important in all kinds of different ways, not just everyday working, but professional development and ongoing sharing of working knowledge, I think. And then looking to secure a sustainable future for Green OA in Ireland through funding and through shared governance. So the next piece is the pilot of metadata alignment. So I'm just going to hand back to Cillian. Thanks.
Just 1 second now, I get this ready. So hopefully you should see that, the pilot approach and progress. Chris, you okay? You can see it? Yeah, excellent. Thank you. Yeah, so thanks, Chris. So I think like the idea here today is, yeah, it's definitely to give the bit of vision, a bit of the detail, and then kind of this extra kind of detail in the pilot. And the aim here is, I think, is just to hopefully, people will start thinking of questions. Even if you don't agree with anything, we want to hear that as well. We want to hear kind of everything, any kind of feedback you have. So after this, we're going to stop, and we're just going to have some opportunity to do that. So I'm just going to give a quick overview, really, of the pilot approach. Really, I think so. There's 4 repositories in the pilot. ATU, that's Seán, University of Galway, Chris and myself, really, and Trish, of course. Trish is the main person. Marine Institute, that's Stephanie, of course, and a shout out to Stephanie as well for the slides, the last slides that Chris showed there, because Stephanie helped create those and present those as well at the Open Repositories Conference, and the HSC with PORIC. So like there is alignment here in terms of all of these repositories using DSpace and having somewhat compliance with OpenAIRE, but they have different kind of use cases as well. So just to call it out straight away, we wanted to achieve something together first and then build on that. So we weren't going to pick all the most difficult cases of maybe DSpace and then other suppliers of repositories as well, and have a big mix across the board. I think that can be added later. And I'll make the point again, I think, in slides, but what we're doing is we are going through a process that's creating generic guidelines based on OpenAIRE, but I'll talk a little bit about that. So like each of those different institutions, even though there are similarities, there are obviously different challenges, because the institutions have different needs, different workflows, different ways of operating. So some of the different kind of issues are there on the screen. I'm not going to call out any of them specifically, but what we did identify is that there is 2 main use cases here. One use case kind of with ATU and the University of Galway together, where we were really looking at the kind of the wider workflow, and we were looking to feed data from our CRIS into the repository. So it's not just about the repository, it's about whatever is kind of upstream of that as well. And if we are aiming for compliance, what does that mean? Are we aiming to be compliant at the repository level, at the CRIS level? What can we do kind of between the two? And there's a lot of different approaches you could take there. So it's about data quality. It's about relationships in the organization. If they're not there, building them with the research officer or whoever manages the CRIS. It's really an opportunity, I think, really because I think it's a win-win scenario in the sense that we can kind of both help each other, and it's been very positive so far. And then the other use case is where the repositories make mainly not completely, but mainly kind of manual updates to the repository. So you're directly using the repository, and there isn't really a kind of a CRIS kind of pushing data into it. The same issues are across the board, of course. So what's our approach? Our approach, I don't expect you to read all this, but the approach in broad brush is to start with the OpenAIRE compliance version 4 guidelines, which we've called out in the report and all the work. That's our alignment to go through each one of the mandatory fields and the fields that are recommended as well. So that's the first step we did. So I suppose we created that list of fields, and then we're going to go through each field and say, at least at the starting point, if there's a common understanding of that field, if there's a common approach for how we deal with it, and how we get content into it. And if there isn't a common approach, well, then we need to discuss it. So generally, each one of these fields is taking a lot of discussion, clearly. So, title is probably the easiest one, but that created some discussion. Description, moving to creator, where it gets a little bit more complicated. So we're in that process now. I'd say we're kind of about halfway through, and we're identifying a couple of things. We're identifying clearly, like if the OpenAIRE compliance piece in DSpace version 7 for OpenAIRE version 4 needs any tweaking, and then what kind of guidelines we're going to create for the community as well. So all this is being tracked basically for each field. And as we get down to dates, things get a little bit more kind of complicated, and we're definitely finding stuff that we have to go back and ask. Maybe it's not really asking OpenAIRE, I think, about what the definitions are. I think that's pretty clear, but asking about the implementation in that repository. What was their thinking? So they've looked at the guidelines and then they've implemented it, and it's sometimes it's not 100% clear about the approaches that are taken, so the crosswalks that are taken. So this is it's a kind of a detailed exercise, but it's very, very useful as well. I think it's good learning across the board. So just general points in terms of what we're doing. We're talking about guidelines that are in flux the whole time. We're talking about technology suppliers that are in flux the whole time. So the whole thing is in flux the whole time, and it's aiming for improvements. So we need to be that way as well. We need to be continually updating it. But the main message, I think, is the repository managers are the people who update content in the repository. There needs to be an awareness of what our collective view is on each field nationally. And the mappings that are used as well. That's not difficult. I think that's part of the guidelines. So that sort of level of detail is being created. And then for kind of legacy content, there's different approaches we could take here. You can draw a line in the sand and move on from a point in time, and that's generally what we do, I think, in repositories. But we've also had discussions about that. We know that once something gets into open air, even if it is missing metadata fields, we know it's enriched using what open air do. So we're not going to use that as a cushion, to say, oh, we don't need to do anything. But I suppose we need to be hyperly focused, I think, on the content that only exists in our repository. So these are the kind of the ways we are trying to think. So if we are the only source for that data, well, then we need to be the person that's enriching that all the way. So these are just early ideas, I think, at the moment. And then just links for reference, in terms of what we're using, the open air compliance, DSpace documentation, open air guidelines, of course, and then the detail of how DSpace does the crosswalks at the XML level. That's all the stuff that we are looking at. And I mentioned the other use case about the kind of the using the CRIS workflow, so that there is interesting work here as well, because they are different guidelines between the CRIS and the literature, the publications. So that's a still ongoing piece of work where we are. I don't think it's going to be an easy crosswalk, but there is some work done in the community. And the final slide from me is just to say, yes, the clear acknowledgement is this is DSpace only for now. We want to be able to achieve something concrete and actually move forward. And there's enough issues, I think, even in our common understanding of each metadata field without bringing different types of technology implementations into the mix as well. But that will clearly have to come later. And just to be clear again, that the guidelines that we are producing are generic, and they will kind of feed into the entire community. And then looking on, in terms of the project, the way it is set up at the moment, we will have these 4 repositories done. We'll have a guideline, we'll have guidelines, we'll have community, we'll have community management of those guidelines, but then the project comes to an end. So obviously further on, we're looking to bring the other repositories into alignment as soon as possible, continue to kind of work on that community piece. And then, looking to the longer scale, it's kind of going back to what the vision is, I think, overall. So at this point, I am just going to stop and say thank you for listening and hand back to Chris.
Thanks, Cillian. Okay, it's time to welcome our roundtable participants today. Let me just read out their bios very briefly. So Andrew Simpson oversees RCSI Library's educational, research, and clinical support services, including all areas of open research. This has included the migration of the repository to new software to enable a single repository for all item types and integration with the new CRIS, the creation of a post providing fair data support, and monitoring and reporting of OA publications and performance. Andrew previously worked in the UK at the University of Portsmouth, where he established a service within the library to support open research and oversaw the migration and integration of the repository with the new CRIS. He's been an active contributor to NORF groups over the last few years, including on open access monitoring and open access repositories. Caleb Derven has over 20 years of experience in working with library infrastructures and is head of digital scholarship and systems at the University of Limerick. Caleb is the co-chair of the NORF Working Group on Infrastructures and has been an active participant in the international open repository software community and actively contributes towards digital scholarship and OS infrastructures at policy and operational levels. Seán Harnett is the Institutional Repository Administrator at ATU Library, Galway-Mayo, and a board member of NORF's Open Access Repositories Alignment Project. He was previously co-chair of NORF's Working Group on Open Research Skills and Training, and currently represents ATU on Open Air's Training and Support Standing Committee. He has a background in regulatory document and content management, and recently completed a Master of Science in Design and Innovation. So welcome to all our distinguished guests. Thanks for being involved today. And I'm just going to kick off with a question. I have a lot of questions, but we don't have a huge amount of time. So let's just see how we go. But I think it's really important to hear from the community and to hear about your ideas on, where we're going with repositories too. So where are we now? Sorry, looking at my questions. Okay, the data, let's just talk about the data quickly that we gathered last year. So it shows metadata alignment is viewed as a critical need for repositories, but it also shows issues with visibility, funding, staffing, and ongoing technical operations, all of which affect different repositories' abilities to sustain critical open access standards and objectives. How do these findings from all the data we collected match your own institutional experience? And I'll just open that to the panel.
Are you going to kick off, Seán? Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say that I think either you, Chris, or Cillian already touched on it, that while there's a kind of a common aspiration among the different institutional repositories, there's a common aspiration, but like all the institutional repositories are very different based on, different legacy issues, different funding models, different institutional cultures. So, I mean, I'm just speaking for ATU's point of view. What the report I think was useful for us is showing kind of internally that institutional repositories are not just this kind of ephemeral passing concern. They're very much a part of like a sustainable kind of national and international scholarly communications framework. And the word or the phrase that really jumped out for us was sustainability. So the report, the survey data and the landscape report really allowed us to start having conversations internally about sustainability, like sustaining our institutional repository, not just for like a life cycle of like 5 or 10 years, which is what tenders tend to work on, but generationally, we want this repository and its research outputs to be sustainable and in the longest possible kind of roadmap that we can conceive. So in those terms, the report was useful for starting to have conversations internally with other stakeholders.
Thanks, Seán. Andrew, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I'd agree with that. It's been a good prompt for us, I guess. So in terms of the findings, I think in some ways it's reassuring to know that we're not completely out of step with everyone else, and it's not that everyone's got it sorted. I think we'll be going through a similar process to what the pilot's doing of kind of going through the metadata and seeing what's working and what's not. I think for us, we're open air compliant, but we find a lot of our metadata is not showing on open air, and so we're kind of working through that with our own supplier at the moment. I'd also mention Open Air Monitor. Obviously, you mentioned the other NORF projects going on, but Open Air Monitor was launched in June or something, I think, and there's been another useful prompt, and obviously how our own data appears on OA Monitor is a key factor in missing data is the repository feed. So that's also been a kind of useful prompt to us that the report backs up, and would urge people to look at the repositories report as well, just in terms of giving that overview, and it's got some useful links to what's going on elsewhere and so on. But the combination of this project and OA Monitor is kind of really highlighting the metadata issue for us, that we've a lot of work to do to try and bring things in line, but it's reassuring to know other people in a similar situation, and that we've got this long-term idea that this is key really to a wider open access compliance through repositories. You've really got to have it the interconnectedness kind of much better than it is at the moment.
Thanks, Andrew. Caleb?
Yeah, I think I would underscore what both Andrew and Seán said, and just to say that in our case as well, the combination of the different NORF projects, I think, was very useful, and it was useful in how outputs of one, like the monitoring project, support the outputs of the other, like this project. And I think too, what's been especially useful is just the community-led aspect of it, and the fact that there's different types of repositories that are represented on the project board. Yeah, that's would be my observations. Thanks.
Thanks, Caleb. And a few of you talked about the kind of the. It's nice to know, I think you said, Andrew, that there's other repositories in the same kind of boat. Like, what do you think about how is it changing your view of the project on the kind of community aspect, and the fact that similar repositories are having similar issues? Like, has it helped to think about your repository more as involved as a community rather than a single institution resource or something like that? And that's open to anyone.
Yeah, since you mentioned me, I'll come in first. But yeah, I think so, and I think some of the pilot work and so on is also kind of highlighting that issues around basic things like title or date fields and kind of how they're interpreted, or how they're kind of how you can get errors and that sort of thing is going to be kind of useful. And I think longer term, a community that can share effort and learning and knowledge across does help. I mean, a lot of the time in kind of discussions about our repository, it's all about the supplier, and we obviously have a community with other people who use the same software, and that's useful too. But I think there are some issues to do with the National Monitor again, but also just with our own setup and our own knowledge of Irish funders and Irish kind of setup, that we would benefit greatly longer term from having a community where those kind of details and shared experiences can, even if it's a different system, can help us kind of know where we should be at and how to get there. So yeah.
I mean, in a sense, I would say actually that without underplaying the work of the project, the technical alignment, the community alignment are in a way they're low-hanging fruits. Certainly in terms of the community alignment, there's already a lot of shared vision, community buy-in. It's just a question of kind of organizing that into some kind of productive community. And the technical alignment as well is like just a technical exercise to make sure the repositories, are open air compliant. Again, going back to the sustainable thing and the long-term vision, I think there's also, so there's community alignment, there's technical alignment, but I think there's also an important aspect is the strategic alignment of the repositories, especially, and this ties in with the work of the other NORF project as well. I mean, there's like certain reports recently about political activism from librarians, and I guess we could probably take repository managers as well, about carving out a space in the marketplace for alternatives. And Cillian already touched on this, alternative to like traditional publishing. And I think in a way, although it's probably a very small part of the output of this project in terms of the larger NORF vision, it can definitely contribute to a strategic vision of alternative avenues for scholarly communication. I think that's strategic alignment is important as well.
Can I come into that?
Stakeholders, sure. Yeah.
Sorry, just to add on that about that kind of that alternative to commercial publishing, the vision of open repositories. I think we might be kind of in general agreement and kind of see the way, but I definitely don't think that everyone is on the same page. I think once you get into it, you kind of begin to see, obviously. but even I think even in our own libraries, I think there's work for all of us to do, to continue to advocate for that. And just to parallel that with something, so you're probably aware that like at the same time there's work going on that Core are instigating. So they're working with OpenAir and they're working with Spark, and I'm going to get it wrong now. I'm going to the last group is Liber, of course. Yes. So they ran a very similar survey to ourselves, roughly at the same time, and they found some very similar things, of course. But one of the things they are chasing now is what they're calling crafting a common vision for European repositories specifically. So there's an open call at the moment where they're looking for input. So I'm just going to share that link just to say that they're definitely calling out the collective vision piece about, we need to get on the same page. We need to find what the role of repositories is. Like, is it, it can be lots of different things. So what is it going to be? I'll just share that link.
Thanks, Cillian. Andrew or Caleb, do you have anything to add to Sean's point about strategic sustainability, or indeed, technical or community sustainability? Like, how do those pieces fit together? How do you see those working?
I think one of the points that I think that Cillian made in a earlier slide about local decentralized repositories within a global context is very important, because at least from my view, when we're aggravating a lot of the of the research that we're talking about, it's often coming from complex and multiple sources, and it's very difficult for people, I think, to kind of map out. Like, if you look at OpenAir, there's lots of inputs, and there's lots of ways that they normalize the data that we're seeing in the open access monitor. But in a national context, I think it's very useful to sort of bring it back to this network of repositories in this sort of decentralized fashion, to sort of be able to discuss how the content is actually being disseminated over over these different networks, and being able to work with one another for that sort of very local support. I think that's quite important at a national level. Just being able to advocate strategically for open access repositories.
Thank you. Andrew, did you have anything further to add on that point?
No, just to pick up on the kind of the expansion, I guess, or the kind of diamond area aspect of this. I think that's another one where community effort and sharing would help a lot. I think that's a huge amount of efforts and time and so on would need to go into kind of building that kind of approach, and obviously bringing authors with you in that approach is a huge thing in itself. But I think just those the slightly less technical aspects of it in terms of approaches, but also ways to ensure your repository is as full as it can be, and making sure that you are automating where you can, or kind of finding ways to populate. I think collectively making sure your repository is a success isn't just sat there for those who know about it, that it's kind of fundamental to your organization and to the research kind of approach of your organization, is something where community can help us, I think, find tactics to do that.
Thanks. And I just have a question. It's kind of focused still on sustainability, and this is Cillian. Feel free to answer this one as well, or anyone. The project runs. The project has this very particular scope, very limited scope, and then it runs to the end of next year. But we're going to set out a roadmap for work to be done. How do we ensure that work is going to be done over the long term, and we reach our goal of 100% open access for the Impact 2030 goal? What do we do to ensure that the project outputs are changed into like, you know, actionable forms of the whole community can adopt.
Do you mean like the kind of the longer term sustainability of like the phases of projects? I suppose.
Yeah. Like
we're kind of doing a lot of what we can do. You know, we're achieving what we were set out to achieve. So like I suppose all we can do really is advocate to centrally for central people to advocate for more funds. And I suppose collectively, I think a lot of the NORF projects are doing that. And I suppose it's a recognized risk, like that you know, if these aren't continued, that's the end of the work. It's the end of the people who are engaged in the work in terms of, let's say, those people move on, we will lose all that skill and that knowledge, and you know, things will grind to a halt clearly. So like, you know, it's just for us to continue, like it needs to happen, but it's kind of out of our hands in one way. You know, we can just put as much kind of individual pressure on, I think. If that's answering your question, I hope it is.
Yeah, it is definitely. I'm just thinking about long-term sustainability, and you know, it's like you say, it's beyond the project itself, and so many different people on the project board are sitting on different projects as well, which just goes to show you, you know, the kind of integrated nature of open access in Ireland. There's so many different things going on, but like different people involved at different levels. So yeah, I'm just trying to get a sense of how do we cohesively move forward beyond the project. But yeah, you've answered that. Thank you. And I just open that up to the panel if you have any further comments.
I mean, it's always...
No, you go. No, you go, Andrew. I've been talking too much.
It's always difficult. I guess it's back to it's kind of the balance of, you know, if you set a group going and so on, but then it's still people's time to go towards that. You know, the big advantage that NORF has had is that it's had money behind it and had formal projects to recruit people or to devote people's time to. So I guess that's part of the challenge. I'm sure we've got lots of a willing community to continue to share and to keep things going, but it's whether something more concentrated is needed in terms of, you know, a continuing pilot or particular issues that maybe the pilot comes across that need more concentrated help and or something more long-term, where somebody is needed to kind of ensure on the ongoing active participation of the community and sharing with the community. So I don't have an answer, I'm just musing on it like you.
Thanks, Andrew. Who else was going to speak then? Sorry, Seán or Caleb, I didn't hear who that was.
Yeah, I mean, in one sense, it's hard to really speak to it because the project has a very defined kind of output. And at the end of the day, once that output is published and the guidelines are circulated, and it's to each repository to implement them within the scope of its own resources. There might be the case for another project along these lines, maybe at a different level, or just continuing work that's already been done. But I think it's hard to say beyond the lifetime of this project what's going to be required going forward, other than, you know, a vision for open repositories in Ireland. But I think that have to be within the keeping of NORF or the kind of the broader open research community in Ireland.
Yeah, I'd just add on to say, like, so the project is creating a roadmap, you know, up to 2030. I think that's a lot of the projects are, and I think a lot of the projects have a common theme, or I suppose issue, that for the work to continue, there needs to be continuous funding. Because like, even to, like, I suppose the next step of this project is to bring the other repositories on board. Like, realistically, I don't think that's going to happen unless there is some central collective kind of action to make it happen. Like, even the pilot we're doing now, like, we have a supplier on board, so we have an expert on board, so like the project is paying for that engagement. Like, so like I would, like, we never managed to do this in the past. I would suggest that and potentially that the project will probably just kind of grind to a halt, to be honest. There will be centralized guidelines there, but how much momentum will be behind those when everyone's as busy as they are? I would say I wouldn't be positive. I would think unless there was something central to kind of push it along. And yeah, go back and look. There's a roadmap, and the roadmap by the end of the project will be kind of fully kind of detailed. We have a kind of sketched outline now.
Thanks, Cillian.
Geez, we're probably out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. I just wanted to open it up to the audience if anyone has a quick question. But if there aren't any, that's also fine. I know this is a huge amount of information, and this is the first webinar. We're probably going to do another one once we know the pilot outcomes. I think we'll do a follow-up with the second webinar, and then we'll have more information there. There's just a comment in the chat saying, former Minister for Higher Education, no T-shirt strike while the iron is hot. Just an information, just an observation. Yes, I'm all for striking while the iron's hot. All good. So yeah, I'd just like to say, will there be more NORF funding? That's a very good question. I think that's what we're kind of talking to as well. Fingers crossed. So what was I going to say? I've forgotten. Anyway, yeah, we'll be doing more webinars. We'll follow up, and this has been recorded, so I'll send that out to everyone, or I'll put it online somewhere. But I would just like to thank our panel for their input. I think it's really good to hear from the different community, from the different project board, and yeah, I hope that's been informative. And as I say, if you want more information, just head to the project website. And any questions, please feel free to email me at any time, and we can have a conversation. So thanks so much. Thanks, Cillian, also.
Thanks, guys. Sound.
And I'm going to start recording. Thank you.